And we're going to get started. So welcome, everyone. This is our final Sustainable Budget Team meeting, aside from the January 15th meeting, where we will present to the Board of Education. So for tonight, I just want to run through what we'll be doing. We have prepared a PowerPoint with all the information that we think we would present to the Board of Education as a recommendation moving forward. We did a draft to kind of make it easier. I'm going to go through the draft presentation with you. At the end, what we'll do is we'll do a fist of 5 on does this look good or not, what adjustments might we make. And then following that, we'll actually choose the slides. Every single one of us will help to present to the Board of Education on January 15th, and we'll choose the slides that we would prefer to present. And then we'll have some time in which you can write the script of what you would like to say. And then we'll be collecting that so that we can put that into the actual slide prompts, so that on that evening we're all well and prepared and have a total script for what we might present to the Board of Education. Are there any questions about that? I want to thank you for being here. When we first assembled this team and went forward with here's what we would be doing, it takes a lot of courage and bravery to be a part of that. And I know as we've come closer and closer to the recommendations, that it's hard. It's really hard. This is a hard and challenging time. I want to remind the committee that when we set out on this, we knew that we had some areas within our budget we needed to look at. And that two things that were colliding together at the same time really were, one, the sunsetting COVID dollars or ESSER funding. That was the $100 million that we had to help mitigate the impacts of COVID. To remind everyone, this district did engage in a process in which community input was provided about what services and things do our students need to help through this really challenging time of COVID. And so that's how some of the things were added. And now it's forming a committee to look at, okay, now that we have those dollars are sunsetting, now what do we do? The other thing that this committee was initially tasked with also was that at the same time that COVID happened, we were also experiencing severe declining enrollment. And that declining enrollment continued through the pandemic, and we didn't make the adjustments during that time, which no district would have made those adjustments during that time. That was not the right time to make those adjustments. But now as we climb out of the pandemic and its impacts, and we no longer have those dollars to help us, we need to look at making sure that we're right-sized. So those were the two tasks. And so when we looked at the different options, the options included were really the things that had come on board with the COVID dollars and the positions that we hadn't done anything about in terms of right-sizing. All right, I am going to go through the presentation now. So this is a draft of the Sustainable Budget Team presentation to the Board of Education for January 15th, 2025. We say draft in case there's any adjustments that we're going to make this evening. You each have a hard copy in front of you, and you are free to make notes as we go through the presentation of any recommended changes that you think we might need. Every single slide in this presentation are slides that everyone has seen before, as well as our public, because these have all been posted on our website for public purviewing. So nothing that is in this is something that you haven't already seen. So we always at our board meetings begin our board presentations with a review of our vision and our mission. This vision and mission was created by our school board in July. So it's a newer vision and mission. And we'll be revisiting it with the board changes that have happened. We'll actually be revisiting this on January 31st and February 1st. These are our representatives who applied to be on this sustainable budget team, and we want to make sure that at the board meeting we do recognize the people who volunteered, the people who came for all of these meetings and donated their time and worked tirelessly to understand the budgetary picture of the district. We're including in this presentation to the board the team norms that we developed on our very first evening together. Like the School Board of Education, who adopted their norms for governance, we want to demonstrate to them the norms that we chose in for ourselves when we were having these meetings. So students are our top priority, equity of voice, listen to understand, don't listen to respond. Be brave and ask questions. This is a safe space where people are empowered to use their voice and should feel comfortable sharing, and honor diversity of community, as well as assuming positive intent. And we thought this slide belonged in there so that the board understood how we decided to norm ourselves over the last 8 meetings that we've had. We also include the PVUSD strategic goals. We actually read these out at each board presentation that we do, and then we call out the specific goal that that board presentation is meeting. And so in this case, we're really meeting that goal of the fiscal solvency. We also remind the board on this that the purpose of the sustainable budget team was to make collective recommendations to the Board of Education on how we use our resources to best serve students and maintain fiscal solvency in the face of declining enrollment over the next decade. And the recommendations to the Board of Education were to be made at the first board meeting in January. Inserted this slide so that the board would see what we went through in trying to solve this problem, that we made our problem statement, that we gathered and analyzed information, that we looked at potential causes and root causes, and that we tried to identify possible and plausible solutions, and then worked to make a recommendation to the board. So this was the problem statement that we co-created. PVUSD is facing a significant challenge due to declining enrollment and the loss of one-time pandemic funding. To address this issue, we must reprioritize and reimagine our services to scale effectively and maximize available resources. Our goal is to maintain high-quality educational offerings while ensuring equitable access for all students. To achieve this, we must implement solutions with transparency, ultimately positioning our district for success in a sustainable manner. And this aligns to our district goals. It also aligns with our LCAP goals. And finally, we aligned ourselves to what our core values were for this team in the allocation of resources. So we stated on this team that we would be student-centered, that we would ensure equity and access, that we would prioritize our core educational goals, and that we would consider our long-term educational investments. Those were our guiding core values for this team. We also include in this slide deck the order of ranked priorities that we determined in, I believe, our third meeting. And that was that we were going to prioritize teaching and learning first, visual and performing arts second, enrichment opportunities third, mental health fourth, career and college connection fifth, family resources sixth, and educational options seventh. We also put what was as part of our guiding decision making is what are the responsibilities of an educational organization, particularly in a K-12 system. So we include this slide to help the board to understand what we were looking at as we were prioritizing our decision making. And so as an educational system K-12, our primary task that we exist for is to educate students in math, science, and ELA, and that is per educational code. Also included in the slide deck the data that we looked at about how our students are performing in those areas of our core responsibility. And then we include this slide to help the board to understand the enormous amount of work this team went through, the meetings that we held, as well as what we worked on each of those meetings, so that they see the scope and sequence of our work. This slide outlines some of the reductions that have already been made from district office. We want to ensure the board that we're looking at all angles of our district, and that we have already begun making reductions starting last year in areas for the district office governance. And then we walk the board through the different plans that were put together for this team to consider. So here was Plan A that we all looked at. Here was Plan B that we looked at. Plan C, Plan D, Plan E, or options. So we want the board to see and understand the different considerations that we looked at, different configurations of addressing the one-time dollars, and as well as declining enrollment and right sizing of the district. And this is a summary of what the Sustainable Budget team decided to recommend to the board. And so this was the revisions that were added in to option B and D, ended up being the identical plan both ways. So we really came up with, instead of 2 plans, 1. And so this slide then explains how we arrived at the recommendation that we would be providing to the board. And then the presentation ends with public comment and then a Q&A for the board to engage in and discussion. And in the end, it is the Board of Education that takes action on the recommendations. So we're just a recommending body, and that's that. So any questions or comments about what was presented or what may have been left out or the approach of the presentation?
Yes, sorry if I may, a couple of questions. First of all, just for continuity on the, sorry, there's no slide numbers, but when we say for the district office reductions completed, totals approximately $1 million. And then we go on to refer to it through all the options as 750,000. Which is it?
That is a good question. We had a debate about this. So if we include some of the reductions that were made the previous year, it ends up totaling $1 million.
Okay.
So we can make that distinction. That might be, if it's unclear to you, then it'll be unclear to them too.
And my next question, probably should have come a lot earlier, but on these different options, we settle anything between 5 and 8.5 million. My question is, there is nothing in this document at all at the beginning that states what we're aiming for. We've just settled on 5.6. Why? That'd be my question.
Yeah.
Why, if option A at 5 million was acceptable, then why are we pushing for 5.6?
So we can absolutely, that's a good suggestion. We can include that on there. If you'll remember, what we thought we needed to be fiscally solvent in this year would be to accomplish a $5 million reduction. However, we know that next year we will be needing to make a similar reduction amount, another $5 million. So any amount beyond the 5 million just makes it for a little easier, potentially, reduction for next year. We can include a slide that explains that.
Yeah, that'd be useful. My word of caution to that is the general rule for cuts is don't give more than you have to, because I know when we looked through some work last week, there are other projects that are ongoing in terms of cost-saving measures, introduction of new solar systems in different places. A lot of things going on that we haven't yet seen the benefits of or can't forecast what the benefits are. Mm-hmm. I would, I would just say be cautious of putting too many cards on the table at this point, and because it may not be a problem next year, or it may be more of a problem. It, try not to solve next year's problem now, is probably what I was.
And I just wanted to say that is a really, really excellent point. And when we came up with the goal of the minimum of the 5 million, we were we tried to make sure that the cuts that we were recommending or the reductions would not be draconian in nature. So the 5 million is more on the conservative side. And that's why we wanted to have a phase 1, a phase 2, and then a phase 3 for the 26-27 school year, because you're absolutely right. There could be things that change at the state and federal levels, at the local levels. And we do have that time to have the phase 3 that we're building in. So we also didn't want this to be too much of a shock to our system. So we're implementing this phase of reductions, focusing on the one-time ESSER, and then the right sizing that should have been done during COVID. And then it'll give us another year to look at what are the next round.
So I spent this last week listening to a lot of counselors and teachers and parents and students, and like the consensus with all of us at this table is like we don't want to cut all of these positions for mental health. Like that's super, super clear, and I want to reiterate that. Literally nobody wants that. One thing that was interesting to me was one counselor had said that they were had started to learn how to bill to insurance as a team. And then when their supervisor was like changed positions, they were kind of like their sense was that they were left like on their own to figure it out. And so like it sounds like there was these shifts to try and figure out alternative ways to keep the positions alive, even if it wasn't under the employment of the district, or at least to continue getting that like ongoing revenue from the insurance. So I'm just wondering like what happened with that, and how do we like and I know that like what we talked about last week was the district was trying to figure out how to be able to bill, but like what happened that the counselors were learning how to be able to submit claims and bill to some sort of insurance, and why can't we still do that or like rush that a little bit, like as we're transitioning for them to have a different employer?
We're in the process, as I explained last time, of receiving a sub-grant from the County Office of Ed to build out our capacity for the fee schedule implementation. We actually are not technically able to bill yet. We haven't activated the system. And what we're seeing is that at the same time we have been doing this work to build up our billable system, a lot of the nonprofits are also leaning in through the, what is it called, the ECM, I don't know what that stands for, I apologize, learning more about, because you're a, yeah. So they're leaning in to do that work as well. And I think what I've heard folks here saying is that there are expertise in the community, in community-based organizations, in medical service organizations, clinical service organizations who are learning to do that. It will take us some time to build up our capacity to bill, and our rates are so much lower as a school district when we compare them to like federally qualified health clinics and others, that we will never recoup the actual cost of a staff member with that fee schedule program. It supplements a bit, and we're still understanding how much by position and by service type. So it's going to take us a while. So we're not at a point where we could rush it in 2 months and have new information. We're talking about probably a year or two at least.
Curiosity question from, I don't know if this pertains to you, sorry, Andrea. But I'm passing through a curiosity question. It's not directly from myself, but is there another organization or agency or entity that could employ these social emotional counselors that is not the school district and possibly not PVPSA.
Through some of our grant funding in the Student Services Department, we have been working with Encompass Services, and we also are working with a company called, I think it's Educational Student Services, ESS. So we're looking at different models, but it takes time for us to see how much the billing for ESS will return back to the district. For Encompass, they get the service directly. But we're engaging in return on investment conversations and analysis. And again, it's going to take us some time to accomplish that and do it well, right?
But there are other
Oh, yeah.
entities.
Besides PVPSA, there are quite a few.
Piggybacking on what Richard suggested about not taking away things before we absolutely have to take away things. If we know we need to have that $5 million mark, $650,000, we're over that 5 million. How many social emotional counselors we're looking at going back to pre-pandemic numbers, going from 22 to 12-ish roughly? How many more could we afford to add back in with the 650,000?
Karen, that part, we really don't want to get into
Okay.
speaking positions because there's a
Okay.
whole thing with that.
Okay.
So we're just kind of looking at estimates. And even the 5.6 is an estimate. If you'll remember at our last meeting, Jenny talked about using an average to kind of come up with a number.
Okay.
So these are estimates.
Okay, yeah, just trying to honor the feedback received from that of the suggested cuts. That was the one that I received the most feedback around.
I was hoping I can kind of just clarify too, at the last meeting, we discussed, and I know we're not discussing specific positions, however, there was a change at the middle schools, which I think wasn't communicated clearly, and so I'm hoping tonight we can clarify the middle school counseling positions, because they're a school counselor, then there's academic counselors at the high school, and a social emotional counselor at the high school, and then there's social emotional counselors that are split across the elementaries, but there's no social emotional counselor as of now at the middle school. So the middle schools just need a little bit of clarity about what that means in terms of counselors for the middle schools.
Katie, those will be things that we're working through with our labor partners.
Thank you.
And I don't know a whole lot about it, but I believe that they bill out to Medi-Cal. They take students with Medi-Cal, and then they bill out. So if they're getting paid for their services through Medi-Cal, why is it that PVUSD pays them such an exorbitant amount of money? It's just because I don't know.
Yeah, I think what happens with that is when you contract with a company, the company does their portion of what they need to do to run their company, but we're also paying for a portion to partner with them. That's how partnerships work. So that's the model for PVPSA and for any of our other mental health clinician services. So they may be billing out, but they're servicing our students, so we're paying for them to do that. Parents can also just go into PVPSA and have their students seen in that way too.
Okay, I don't want to get too far off topic from that, but I've had a lot of thoughts over the past week about the process of what was presented to us in the options. It was difficult for me to process it and articulate it at the last meeting, but one thing that I'm struggling a little bit with is, we had 6 meetings where we went through a lot of work in small groups, and we came up with a lot of ideas that never made it to those options that were presented to us last week. And it feels like to me like those 5 options were sort of just variations of the same cuts, different dollar amounts, but all coming from the same place, whereas like there were other places that never really were presented as options. And just one example of that is like in our order of ranked priorities, we listed mental health as number 4, and just as an example to throw out there, not that I'm advocating for any types of cuts, but we put educational options, online learning and interventions as number 7. And when we discussed last week and we looked at like changing up the option B and the option D, people specifically said, let's not touch intervention, let's go with socio-emotional. But if we ranked educational options as our least important of the priorities that we came up with at the beginning of this program or this process, we didn't talk about the virtual academy. There's a whole bunch of other things that I think that were like up on the walls that we talked about that just never were presented as an option for this $5 million cut.
So a lot of the things that were up on the wall that made it were actually additions. They weren't really going to be reductions. They were wonderful and great ideas, and I hope ideas that we'll see fruition for, because they were great and we have them all saved and categorized and all of that, but there were really no reductions being offered in there. Virtual Academy isn't an area where we can see any reductions. It's driven by the number of students in the program and the number of teachers indicated to teach those students. So there wasn't really. Virtual Academy did have a full-time principal, and it no longer has a principal. The Renaissance High School principal oversees Virtual Academy.
So I am on topic for PVPSA. I would like to know how many students a PVPSA mental health clinician can serve in a day, whereas our mental health clinicians employed in our district, like thinking about the hours that they work in a day, which is probably 8 hours. We don't represent the mental health clinicians, but they're probably 8-hour-a-day worker. And I'm just thinking about the number of students they can serve, and I would like to know what PVPSA has as a standard for the number of students that one clinician can see in a day. Also, the amount of money that we contribute to PVPSA is over 2 times than what we had, what this district had contributed in 1920. And the contracts back then actually also had wording where there was some monies out of the funds that the district contributed that then they were responsible for taking money from that amount to pay for another agency. But now the contracts read where it is on top of what the district gives them every year. They give them an additional amount, or the district pays that an amount to this other agency. So I'm sorry, I can't remember all that wording because that was from this last week when I was looking at that. But this district is contributing actually closer to $2 million this year. And that just only cutting $500,000. If we're like talking about, pre-pandemic and then now, that's a lot. And that is a good number of positions that we can maintain in our district who are serving our students.
Nellie, we have some of that information. Jenny just pulled it up so we can share that. She's going to share, I think, with Silvestre so we can put that slide up. So we're looking at Sustainable Budget Team meeting number 4. This was a slide that was shared that outlines PVPSA, their contract, the number of students served, the number of visits each student had, the potential cost per student over the course of the year and the cost per visit. We also share that information with Encompass and Effective School Solutions.
Can you help me understand what the nearly 2 million is spent on? I mean, I see these numbers here, I see the numbers served. But this was also shared with many parents and folks across the district, and they're still feeling really confused. And so I'm wondering if, like, you guys could maybe explain it, how you would explain it to a second grader?
I'm not sure what, so we contract with PVPSA to provide mental health services to our students. So the contract we're paying for is for them to have those clinicians available to the students that are being referred for services. So that's the contracted amount. That's the agreement that we entered into. That agreement grew with the pandemic and the pandemic needs, and that contract is being reduced for this upcoming year.
Beyond the reduction of the 500,000 that we're talking about here?
No, that's the amount that is being reduced. That had already been negotiated as part of just what was some of the ongoing work.
Could we think about maybe, since we keep talking about PVPSA and socio-emotional counselors, can we think about doing like a fist of five type thing at this table to see who would be in favor of potentially cutting more from PVPSA and fewer socio-emotional counselor positions, or fewer dollars from this, like swapping this?
We can do that, absolutely, and if that is the direction that the team wants to go in, I completely understand. I do want to caution everyone that we don't really have the expertise to oversee some of these programs. Our focus is educating our students, and most districts do partner alongside, like a PVPSA, Center for Human Services is another one that's popular in areas, to provide those services because they can provide the clinical supervision necessary, and we don't provide that.
And that definitely is the feedback too of, like, that, at least that I am hearing, is having that skilled reflective supervision. But what I'm also hearing is from the counselors is that they're overworked and they have just too much of a caseload because the need is so great still. So it's, like just trying to figure this out. And then,
Yeah, and I think just looking at, like, I'm just my site, that's all I can speak to, but my PVPSA counselor serves 5 students, which I'm super grateful for, but my social emotional counselor probably sees 8 to 10 students a day, and she's there 2.5 days a week. So I think about how many kids she can serve versus how many are served through, and there are limits and very specific requirements associated with PVPSA, and I know it's a different level, of support, but if we're talking about just meeting student need, that's where I would be in support of looking at perhaps an option where we could keep a little bit more social emotional counselor support.
I mean, I think if we think about what Richard said at the beginning, which is super good feedback, and I think we should consider just keeping it at 5 million because there is going to be that discussion again next year of making more cuts. And I just, in my experience, like, having worked for this district for a long time, usually, like, even if cuts are made now, they're still going to say we have to make a bunch of cuts next year anyway, right? So if we keep it at 5 million, that's 650,000 that can go back into the to make the reduction to socio-emotional counselors only 350, and then you could add on that you could eliminate that line completely, and you could say we're going to reduce PVPSA by 850, and that still gives them over half of what they had last year or this year. And back to what it was, it's still more than what it was in 1920, as Nellie pointed out.
and if we did that, maybe we can buy some time while the district figures out how to bill. So if it sounds like the only reason we're not really billing to insurance is because we haven't figured out that whole system, like that part hasn't been
Yes, the whole
established, right?
system hasn't been, it's not us haven't
No, no,
figured
no,
it out.
No, I know,
It's
but like the
is figuring
system
itself out.
itself hasn't been established.
Yeah.
Like it has not been figured out, but like, I wonder what we could do with some time.
Yeah, I don't, so our understanding of that is although we will be able to bill, it will not cover the cost of providing what, the level that we're providing now. And
Even under another agency, like if it was under Encompass or under PVP?
yeah, just like Andrea explained, they're able to bill because they are in that business and they have the licensing to do that. They're able to collect more for the billing than we are able to. I didn't write the fee structure, so I'm not quite sure why it's like that, but it is like that.
I guess like my thought process is that like a shift of, not an elimination of the positions, but a shift of who their employer is. Like it wouldn't be.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Is it possible to just cut the PVPSA contract altogether? Because PVPSA literally only takes children that have Medi-Cal, right? And so I'm saying this because it's all about money for this company. We can still send our children that need PVPSA to PVPSA for their services after school or before school. We would save $2 million if we cut the contract now. It's like a Band-Aid solution, rip the Band-Aid off now, and we would be able to ensure that the schools that need the counseling services on site, like Valencia, they'd get their social emotional counselor maybe 5 days a week, right? Instead of having somebody only 2 days a week, she might, well, she might get somebody 5 days, right? Because that's the need of the children. SELPA might look at that and say, hey, you know what, we need to put somebody here 5 days a week. That's the need. I'm saying this because PVPSA is bleeding us dry right now, and it's not about the kids, you guys. Medical billing isn't the problem. Our job at PVPSA, for me as a high school parent, I'm here representing high school parents right now, is education in children, right? And what I want to see at our schools, middle schools, high schools, elementary schools, is that our children are being serviced in education, okay? PVPSA is not servicing our children in education. They can get those services off-site. PVUSD is doing a tremendous job meeting the social emotional needs of our children because they've shown that in who they hire as district employees. We need to make hard decisions, and I'm telling you this, sorry, I'm still like under the weather right now. We need to make these hard decisions, and I know that people are gonna be upset, and I know it's hard to make hard decisions, but I'm telling you this as a mother, as a district employee, as a human being from every fiber in my body, that this is the easiest cut that we can make. This is the easiest cut we can make without even thinking twice about it, because this is not gonna hurt our kids. What will hurt our kids is not cutting PVPSA, I'm telling you right now.
So one thing Jenny and I are looking at is the length of time of the contract, because we do enter into contracts with them. And so we're unclear right now on if the total amount can be reduced. We know 100% of the fact that we can reduce it by 500,000, and we have that paperwork here. Mm-hmm. We're looking at it right now.
I just want to say one more thing as far as the intervention piece. I know intervention's listed under priority 7, but when I was advocating last week, I see it as a critical part of teaching and learning, which is our first priority. So that's why I advocated that we don't cut intervention. So just clarifying that.
And when talking with parents, many parents are very concerned and frustrated and overwhelmed with their children who have disabilities and learning disabilities, physical and learning disabilities. Those kids are having a really hard time, so.
I said we can control where we can cut. We're a little top heavy at SELPA. Maybe we need to relook at SELPA and,
Yeah,
you know.
actually, SELPA is going through what we call the FICMAT process, where we are having a deep study done to help us to understand how to be more effective with our SELPA. That study was approved by the board in December or November and will not commence though until February of this year. Just there's a large, they have a waiting list.
I think knowing that too, it does underscore Richard's point earlier that we only cut what we have to cut. Because we know that once that comes out, there's going to be more cuts that can be made next year.
Okay, so this is a little different than what I thought would happen tonight. Last week, I thought we actually had 24 people come to consensus about the recommendations. And so the PowerPoint we prepared was based on the recommendations and the work that we've done up until this point. It sounds like the Sustainable Budget team is changing their minds about recommendations that we had already previously agreed on. So that changes things a little bit. We do have timelines that we have to reach in this process because of the recommendations and how the budget development process begins. So I'm hearing then that, I'm not quite sure what I'm hearing. Have we wavered completely from our recommendations and we're moving back to a different scenario or solution, or are we moving forward with the presentation as we had reached consensus last week? I'm unsure what to do next, to be honest.
Regarding the timeline that we're working with, we have a lot more folks at home watching tonight than there were before. Could you guys just give like a reminder of the timeline that we're working with?
Yes, so when school districts need to look at the different reductions that they're making, there's considerations for personnel and laws that have to be met, as well as contracts that have to be renewed through budget development or contracts that need to be let go. And we also always want to give the earliest warning to anyone we might not be partnering with anymore, or also to employees. And so those timelines for employees is March 15th. And for our consultants is pretty much in that area as well, because Jenny and her team begin the budget development process right at that same time.
If I may, at this point, I think my feeling now within this room that I'm getting is that due diligence is something that we have to put to this. And in my mind now, I feel there are more questions than answers. When I look through the proposal, and absolutely agree with what last week, we seemed like we got way ahead. I think when we look at the bottom three, district office reductions, the AC reduction and the elementary release ratios, I don't think there's any argument there. It's right sizing and it's cuts that have already been made. It's just the mental health bubble that we're talking about. And I'm sat here thinking, well, I didn't understand the whole PVPSA and the Medicaid, so thank you for that education. If there isn't an offshoot to that, one would say, well, why wouldn't we just stop it if it is available elsewhere? And so I guess a lot of words there, so what I'm leading to, the fact is there's some more expanded information that I think I would want before I would sign my name to anything like this. Bearing in mind we know it's just a recommendation, is that, what is the PVPSA contract requirements? What can we do with that? and then we weigh that off against the social emotional counsellors and the general ed, and we aim for 5 million, and see where we land with that. And that's something I would then feel
I like that. I was just
better
gonna say,
putting my name
I'd
to.
like to reduce, our first and second, or maybe even also, reduce our first and second, points of general ed and social emotional down to, meet our total, more closer to 4.9 or 5 million. So then that way that it just seems, it don't sit well with me at my core that we're cutting district office reductions and we're cutting general ed and mental health, social emotional at 1.5 and 1 million. And district office reductions is sitting pretty at 750. It just hurts my soul.
Just want to call out there that there's less people employed in the district office than it when you look at all the sites. So those other numbers are like all the sites combined, and then versus district. Yeah.
And then one thing I wanted to call out is the 750 is on top of the close to $1 million in reductions we've already done. And in the district office, we have many departments that are almost either fully funded by restricted grant monies or mostly funded by restricted grant money. So I know it seems like we have a lot of people here at the district office, but for example, food and nutrition, that entire department is funded out of restricted dollars. Migrant Seasonal Head Start, early childhood. So we have, yes. So one thing I wanted to talk about in terms of how we're thinking about the reductions also is how are these getting funded? So we talked about when the one-time ESSER dollars went away. A lot of what ESSER was funding and before that ELOG, it got moved into our district unrestricted. And that's where we have to really start reducing. So in our restricted, right now that is supporting our PVPSA contract. And so we do already have ideas in mind about reducing that going forward. So that's already included in our multi-year projections. But where we want to focus is really on the unrestricted side. So out of ESSER, all of those supports that we brought on because of the pandemic and to mitigate the learning loss post-pandemic, those were absorbed by the unrestricted. So as a team, I think one thing we have to think about is anything that we keep on from the ESSER dollars in unrestricted, then that probably means that there has to be a cut somewhere else. If we're reprioritizing mental health as we did as a team, then it might mean that there has to be a cut in another program. So all of this, it's not just in the general fund as a total. We're really looking at it, how much of it is coming out of the unrestricted, which is the important funding source.
So question, maintenance and operations isn't on this list because we got that beautiful M, correct?
So actually for Measure M, that's a great question. Thank you, community, for voting that in. So Measure M is very restricted money. State facility bond money is one of the most restricted forms of money that schools can get. It can only be spent on approved capital projects, meaning construction projects, and very few types of positions specifically to support the program administration. So we are not able to use that just for any M&O position. It can really be used for Measure M projects, and then a very small amount on positions to support making that project or bringing it to fruition. So M&O is pretty much fully supported by our general fund. Yes.
And just to add on to that, in the sustainable budget team meeting where we looked at our staffing and our staffing ratios, one discovery that we had is that our maintenance and operations department is actually severely understaffed. So that's why we wouldn't see that on. And to echo and just underscore what Jenny said is a lot of what we're looking at is what was added during the pandemic to mitigate the conditions that the pandemic created. And so these were things that were added, and you've heard me say before, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. And so when those dollars sunset, as well as students were not enrolling to the level that we had them, we find ourselves having to make the difficult decisions of what do we still continue forward with and what can't we? And these were things, what we discussed through this team were purely the things that were added through one-time funding.
So the outside the box ideas where we got to think and imagine life and education as if we were in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Will those ideas be able to maybe come to life when we think about how we cut the budget next year?
Well, most of the ideas that were shared were amazing and wonderful, and like I said, we have categorized them and kept them, but they were all additions. Like it was spending more money rather than looking at ways to reduce. So,
My idea was not an addition.
I don't know whose idea was what. We didn't have
I
names by
had
them,
an
but
idea
you
to
talk-
shift our school calendar and in hopes to cut the HVAC,
Yeah.
the HVAC.
And so
billing.
that might be something, but that is a negotiated item. And so we would have to be working with our bargaining partners on that, and that calendar we haven't negotiated that.
I have an idea. So we got together and we worked the first 6 meetings. We took step-by-step approaches. We prioritized. We brainstormed. We got a lesson on how to read a budget. It was all theoretical. We did the massive brainstorming, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. That was kind of fun, the homework assignment. We were told on day one that this would be hard, that we're going to have to cut something. You're not going to get everything you want on your Christmas list. After last meeting, it got personal. Positions being cut. People watched the stream. They started talking. I was just approached coming in here by a couple counselors that I see at sites with like fire and hurt in their eyes, like we're doing something to hurt their livelihood. This isn't what this is about. We're making tough decisions. People are involved. Now that it's getting more personal, we're all feeling it. Tonight has turned into kind of a retread, a reassess of our ideas that were theoretical. Now they're becoming real. So I make a motion to meet our timeline. Since tonight we were just going to kind of do our dress rehearsal for the presentation, what if we use the rest of the meeting tonight to kind of readdress and amend some of the numbers and cuts? All these ideas that I've heard tonight are fantastic. I've been pretty quiet on this committee just because there's so many good thoughts by people closer to the problem than me as a substitute and a tester. I even thought tonight, what if we just cut substitutes and let the teachers cover the classes? Would that save $5 million? I don't want to cut my job. I'm just saying, trying to think as fairly as possible. So if we have a 9th meeting, January 12th or 13th during the SBC days, like the night before school starts, that's closer to the presentation 2 days later. Is that an agreeable thing? We don't necessarily need dinner. It doesn't have to cost anything, just our time, so we can kind of do a rough draft amendment. We're not ready for the final draft yet. Is that something that's possible?
So we have to upload documents into our board documents prior to the board meeting. So we have a board meeting January 15th. And then I also have a special study session with our board on December 19th.
But if we did it like January 12th or 13th, I think the 13th is Monday, the 14th is Tuesday, the 15th is Wednesday. What if we did it?
The board has to review it on the 19th. She's just kindly saying no because she's a sweetheart.
But if we're presenting on the 15th, so they would review this, in 2 days? On the 18th? December 19th. Gotcha.
So they're
What if we met
reviewing.
Thursday then? I'm just
So-
trying to think of an option to get out of our sinking feeling, the consensus that I'm sensing right now is we're not really going to have a lot of passion in our presentation.
Let's work through the hard feelings, you guys. Let's work through it and come up with some numbers. This is tough stuff, and I'm sorry I wasn't here last week, you guys. I was going through it, but.
So I'm going to just remind
Yeah.
the team that we're recommending, and we're
Yeah.
making just recommendations to the board to help the board in the very challenging work that you now see this is, because they are going to have to make decisions, and that's unavoidable. So maybe
And the
what we can
recommendation doesn't mean that these
do-
numbers are going to be the numbers, you know? Like,
It's a rough estimate.
Yeah.
Correct. So maybe what we can do is, instead of recommending an option, we present the options
Mhm.
to the board, that through our discussions, and I want to remind everyone, the options that were put together by the core values that the team prioritized on our second meeting. So maybe what we can do instead is bring the PowerPoint in its totality, take out the recommendation of anything, just B and D, just here's some 5 ways that we thought we could move forward in making these difficult decisions, and leave it there. Would that work?
Can we add a slide of, to represent our conversation tonight?
What would that side look like? I mean, we can add whatever, absolutely, but I don't know what, like,
I heard some pretty specific stuff tonight. And I just wondered what that would look like in a slide.
yeah, we can do that. I mean, absolutely, and I'm sure the board is watching this meeting too. It is live streamed and recorded. And that helps, to see.
And then the one thing that we'll have to consider as we're creating the last option is looking at the impact to the unrestricted versus the restricted, because like the PVPSA right now, that's getting funded out of a restricted grant. It moved from ESSER, which was restricted, into another restricted block grant. So if we're reducing the PVPSA even more, it's going to impact on the restricted side, which is not so much of a concern for our district. It's more the ongoing unrestricted side. So as we're kind of thinking about those things, if you give me a little time, I can start to separate out how much of it is truly going to be the change that we need to create a sustainable budget.
So, thank you, Jenny, for that. But I also want to ask then, like, this district contributes out of our general fund, our unrestricted dollars, about what, close to $40 million, somewhere between $30 and $40 million to the restricted fund. So I'm curious if we're talking about how monies shift from one account to another, it's really not impacting the limiting it, like, oh, we're only reducing then in the restricted area, when we are taking unrestricted monies every year to contribute to the restricted fund.
And we do an unrestricted to restricted. It's called a contribution in school finance, but it's really only for very specific programs. So here at PVUSD, we do contributions from our unrestricted fund into special education to fund our special education program, and then to fund, it's called the restricted routine maintenance account. So because we are a district that receives state facility funding, we are required by law to contribute 3% of our actual expenditures every year. So that 3% goes into what we call the restricted routine maintenance account to keep up with our facilities requirements. So those are really the only 2 restricted programs that receive the contribution. And all the other restricted programs, so for example, PVPSA has shifted from one-time ESSER into the one-time learning recovery block grant. So that program does not receive any sort of unrestricted support or contribution.
It is all very complex. School finance has many, many, many rules. It's not like your savings account to your checking account. There are many rules and regulations that govern how you can move that.
And so any of our mental health clinicians or social emotional counselors, none of those are funded out of the same source that PVPSA is funded out of. Is that correct? Or are some funded out of there? Right, I just want to make sure that we're understanding that correctly.
Yeah, so currently our social emotional counselors are funded out of our unrestricted. Our mental health clinicians, we have our mental health clinicians that are serving our gen ed students. So those mental health clinicians right now, let's see, are funded out of unrestricted, and then we have SELPA mental health clinicians, and they're funded out of the restricted special education.
For that in writing, you can look at the sustainable budget team session number 4, and on slide 26, it has how those are funded.
Yeah, so that's why I just wanted to clarify that if we were to try and flip some of these numbers within, it doesn't really help us save any more positions because it's two different funding sources.
Yes, and then the other thing about the Learning Recovery Block Grant that right now is supporting PVPSA is it's one-time dollars. We have a multi-year strategic plan tied to it, but it's slated to end at some point in the future as well. Don't quote me on this. I want to say 27, 28 is the year that it ends, and it's already tied to some strategies and priorities that the district has already established. So as we're thinking about what we have to reduce, that's another complexity that adds to it. Our focus really is on the unrestricted because that's where we're deficit spending. That is what we consider in the finance where we call that a structural deficit, because it's built in its salaries. It's our own people that we're employing, so those are costs year over year. They're not one time like a contract that we would be able to end.
But just to clarify, I don't know if Nellie's question was completely answered. If we're contributing money from the general unrestricted into restricted, and we want to make a cut from restricted, why can't we just contribute less money from the unrestricted to the restricted to offset that?
And that's a great question. So because right now the two programs that are taking contributions, one for the restricted routine maintenance, it's a required 3%. So we have to maintain that mandate each year. And then the other program is special education. And we have invited BICMAT to come in and to give us some best practices and guidance around looking at that program. But we're not quite there yet. So we imagine looking at special education in the next phase of possible restructuring.
By reducing the PVPSA contract by 500 or more, what then does that help us do? Because if it doesn't help us save other things, then I'm not sure. I'd like to understand the purpose behind it. Like, how does eliminating that help us?
So if we were to reduce PVPSA even more than the 500,000, what it would do is it would open up some funding in the Learning Recovery Block Grant. And then what we could do is we could evaluate the allowable uses within that block grant to see if we can maybe transition something in unrestricted over. But one thing we have to keep in mind is that what source of funding does end in 27, 28. So essentially, it's kind of what the district had been doing during COVID, which was kind of kicking a little bit down the road. So.
Can I ask one more clarifying question? Okay, so it says general ed mental health clinician reductions, non-SELPA. So that means we can't touch any of the mental health clinicians that are SELPA, correct?
It does not mean that necessarily, but we have to, that's a lot of analysis that has to be done, which we will be doing. But there are services tied to students through special education, individualized educational plans. And so it's not as simple to just say we are not providing those services.
Yeah, I
So we have to look at what do we have in IEPs? How are we making sure we're meeting the legal guarantees of the IEPs?
So it says reductions, but what I just want to understand is the 1.5 million actually eliminating all general ed mental health clinicians? Will there be any general ed mental health clinicians left?
Yes, there will still be general education mental health clinicians.
There will be,
Yes.
even if we take that. Okay, thank you.
So I think the point is now 54 minutes. How do we drive concurrence for the deadline that isn't January, it's tonight?
I think we
Is that
just want to
achievable?
talk, like, re-talk a couple numbers. Or do we have to stay with these numbers?
No, we can look at that.
Okay. What I'm hearing from my amazing peeps at the table, 5 different people have said that they feel more comfortable with staying around 5 million. Is that something that we can configure?
Again, yes, but I'm gonna say it is an estimate. I don't want anyone coming back and it's, 5.1 and so it could come in a little more and a little bit less, but we can look at that.
I'm wondering if, just thinking through what you had shared, Dr. Contreras, which is all of the options, and then just having an honest kind of conversation with the challenges, because they will have to we're coming forward with a recommendation regardless. They don't have to accept our recommendation, but we share the process and we share the challenges from tonight, and they're probably watching. But I just think that perhaps it does come down to, these were the options we were given. It was challenging. Here's where we landed. Still weren't sure we were ready for that land. And here's the conversation that we had as a result of that land. And we appreciate you having to make the difficult decision.
Yeah, that can definitely be the approach. So what I would then look at is going back to, here were the different plans. And again, these plans came together through positions and services added with one-time dollars, as well as the declining enrollment that we do have to right-size. So these are the plans that all of you looked at. And then really ultimately what we can say is you did devise your own plan, which was fine. That was great. That was really, really great. And that in the end, this was the best work that we could do to represent the community and the community feelings around what actions the board might take. And then if we want to have a slide created that Nora recommended, we can put a final slide right after this one, kind of showcasing, and then here's the conversation that happened. Here's what the main points are. Maybe what we do then is some bullet points on what we discussed. And then that's that. Is everyone okay with that approach? That's what, do we create another option?
What if we were to break into our small groups for 20 minutes and recrunch these numbers? It seems doable. We're looking at the areas, like if we reduce as much as we can from PVPSA and then add to general ed to the counselors that are employed by us and shift that 1.5 million to 500, shift the PVPSA to 1.5 million.
So one thing I do want to.
That's just an example.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. One thing I do want to state around how the plans were developed is it was, like Jenny said, the approach of making sure we were looking at the restricted and the unrestricted. Because as Jenny described, if we do everything from one, it's not really solving what we need to solve. And so each of the plans reflect what we know help to solve the problem that we were working to solve.
We could, though,
Whereas a different combination, for instance, like just taking this, might not have that restricted to unrestricted match that we need.
we could, though, from the 5,650,000, pull 500,000 out of that, and we could lower the number to 1 million for mental health clinicians, or we could lower the social emotional counselor cut to 500,000. And that still keeps us over a $5 million cut. Yeah? Okay.
Yes, and like Dr. Contura said, because we're working with estimates, if it seems like it's coming in a little under, we might have to bump up one of the areas when we're finalizing everything. But I do feel like we do have that flexibility, especially with all the feedback that we're getting from this team in the community, and we really want to honor kind of the spirit of why we put the team together. So we can absolutely look at that. Richard, that's a great idea, breaking out into the smaller groups, maybe looking at the different options now that we have a little bit more information. The one thing I did want to point out is, yes, we have to find that balance between not making too many cuts unnecessarily, not being draconian, but then also savings today are savings going forward. So if we save 500,000 in 25-26, then in 26-27, that's compounded to $1 million in savings. So as we know as a community, we're going into another phase of reductions. It's not going to be a 500,000 added on in that year. It's having been compounded. So that's just one thing I wanted to just have the team also think about for the next group that has to be doing this work.
We might have a really big kinder group that comes in next year in the fall, like massive.
Actually, I wish I
the kinder roundup was amazing.
That would be amazing. But the Department of Finance actually just released their 2024 enrollment projections. Santa Cruz County, we used to be number one on that list, meaning we were the number one county in the entire state projected to lose the most amount of enrollment over the next decade. Thankfully, we are now number 5, but it's still really, really high. So as a district, we've lost 18% of our enrollment in the last decade. And according to the projections from the Department of Finance, and they're using factors like birth rate from the Department of Human Services. So they're projecting for our county another 18% decline by 2033-34. So that's one thing I'm going to strongly, strongly urge our team is, right-sizing and not continuing to kick kind of these really, really hard decisions down the road, because that's kind of why we are in the spot that we are in, and not putting the next team in a harder spot. So, and I know that this is an impossible decision. So.
I was just kind of reflecting on our norms and like the top one being students are our top priority in decision making. And I still think, with the exception of like the 750,000 from the district office, almost every cut is coming from a service or something that directly touches or impacts a child. And so when you talk about 18% of our enrollment hit, I recognize that you've cut from the district office already and that we're looking at cutting a little bit more. But the cut should potentially be like proportional to that 18% enrollment drop if we're looking to keep services directly impacting the children. So maybe we could look at increasing that 750 to a higher number for district office. Right. Or even, yeah, I don't know, just cutting away from the classroom counseling.
And I just wanted to point out that it will actually be closer to 2 million because we've already reduced 1 million already to this date. So the 750 is actually going to be on top of the 1 million that we've already done this year. So it'll be closer to $1.8 million from the district office.
Because I know that, you know, a lot of positions in the district office cost more money than positions that are directly interacting with students, right? So it's hard to like look at the dollar amount of $2 million and see like, what does that represent in the district office compared to what could that represent in terms of, you know, adults that are actually interacting with children.
Okay, so why don't we, it's 7:16, why don't we break into our small groups to take a look at if there's a different way or something else to think about, which I want to note, we did do that last meeting as well, and then everyone came up with the exact same plan. So some consensus there. So maybe we'll look at yet another way. So let's spend the next 20 minutes in your small groups looking to see what we can do, and then we'll come back and take another look. Okay, I'm noticing a couple of our groups formed into super groups. All right. It ended up being like two super groups. I don't know what happened. Or flexible grouping. Okay. So we broke out back into our small groups as we wrestled with the difficult recommendation. And the request was, can we take a look at it and what might we do differently and have a different approach or different idea. So Jenny's taking notes on what recommendations come from that. And then we still have the task at hand of the presentation, just kind of keep everyone on line with what we need to do. And so do we have a group who wants to come forth with a new option? Hold on one second. Did this group decide to stay as is or no, make a change? Oh, sorry.
We did decide to go with a smaller number.
Okay.
We had a,
Oh, you thought it was
no, it was 4 to 3.
Okay, go ahead, Karen.
All right, so our group felt, you know, last week we felt okay with our proposal. I mean, nobody loved it, but we felt okay. But we also felt it was really important to honor the feedback received from the people we are representing. So we therefore would like to move forward with reducing the $5,650,000. We have two options. Our first choice would be to reduce that number to 5 million, take that 650,000 and give 325,000 less in reductions to the general ed mental health clinicians and 325,000 to the social emotional counsel reduction. We're not happy. Sorry, that's horrible wording. We are fine with keeping the bottom three in the proposal as is. It's just the top two really that we want to split that money between. So that would take us to a cut of $1,175,000 for general ed mental health clinicians and a cut of $675,000 for social emotional counselors. That being said, if we wanted to have the total cuts being $5,100,000, then we would be okay with that too. So basically taking 500,000 of that and splitting it 250,000 to in savings, or less of a 250,000 less of a cut to general ed mental health clinicians and 250,000 less of a cut to social emotional counselors, which would take us to 1,250,000 as a total cut for the general ed mental health clinicians and 750,000 for the social emotional counselors. So that is our,
Okay.
and we're
We have-
we're fine with either of those options, depending on, what the other
Yep.
groups say.
Okay.
Yeah? Okay.
Jenny has taken note of that. We will go to this group over here.
No, I was gonna pass that to you.
I was,
Well, we spoke about, continue to speak about PVPSA's contract reduction, but I do like what the other end came up with on wanting to put that investment into our mental health clinicians and social emotional counselors, because that's what is best for our students, as these are people who are on our campuses and are readily available in the event of an emergency, as opposed to, oh, let's see if we can get you in and going through that whole referral process. But we think that you can cut more from the PVPSA contract, like another $500,000, and then put that towards your mental health clinicians and social emotional. Again, splitting that between the two.
Okay, and this group over here?
Okay, so we had some discussion. Several of the group thought we should just stay as we are, and several of the group thought we're with the 250,000 off the top two line items.
So the same,
Yeah.
once again, normed. Okay. Okay.
Can we speak? One of our members thought it was really important for us to speak to the fact that this discussion was very, very long, very difficult, and that we wanted to acknowledge the hard and very important work that the mental health clinicians and social emotional counselors do for our students every single day. We value you, we see you. You are not just a number at PVUSD. The work that you do for our students and our community is invaluable, and there is no number. So we appreciate your work, and having to have this discussion is gut-wrenching.
Agreed. Okay. So Jenny has recorded that. She will start to put that into slide options. A question that I have is, are we taking these new proposals forward as a recommendation? Or are we recommending all the options and saying, here you go?
We want to go with the merger of the merger, please.
Okay. Okay. So our next.
I'm sorry, but quick, if we managed to expand the PVPSA to 750 now, but it's 5, is that what we're saying? 500? So, the PVPSA contract reduction on the paper in front of me is 500,000. Have we managed to just increase that? I Yeah. Yeah, I think as a group we'd absolutely agree, but I thought we'd drawn a line on the fact that the contract couldn't be moved that much. Otherwise
It's
But,
over here, Nellie. We have it if you'd like
okay.
to look at it. I think what he's referring to is not the contract, which now we've looked at. You can look at it as well. But rather the restricted versus unrestricted. I think that's what the reference is to, not so much the contract.
Well, also, I mean, going back to that comment of where you are recouping, I mean, our 3% of our expenses is what, 10 million, somewhere around there? Whatever, we have we have an account like that in our reserves. So that means that there's like 32 million going somewhere else in the restricted. So we still think that they're, I'm sure with some financial savviness, being able to recoup some for our unrestricted.
And that's why we are engaging with PICMAT, because there are only 2 programs that receive contributions from our unrestricted, the restricted routine maintenance and then special education.
Okay, so there are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 of us. And I believe we have 27, I think we'll end up with 28 slides now. So what we would like to have is people choose 2 slides that you would like to be part of presenting for the January 15th presentation. So we're going to give you 5 minutes right now to just look over the presentation and note for yourself what slides you might like. Then what we're going to do is we're going to call out who wants to do slide 1, number 2, and then we'll give some time to have you write a script for your slides. So
I'm not-
5 minutes to look at the slides you'd like to present.
I think there are some of us that do not want to present, so maybe we should get a number of how many people are willing to present before we divide up the slides.
That's fair. Okay, how many presenters do we have for the January 15th board meeting? Four? Richard volunteers as the parent. Oh, we have 2 parents. So raise your hand if you're presenting. Raise your hand very high. 1, willing to, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This side, no?
What's your goal in how many presenters you would like to have?
What we would like to have is everyone be part of presenting. But we understand not everyone feels comfortable with that, and that's fine. We would ask that the sustainable budget team all attend the meeting, which was part of the requirements when we asked for applicants, that you would be willing to do X, Y, and Z. So how about we do this, where our presenters, if each person not presenting can partner with the person presenting, just to help them look at the slide, be a support person to that person, so that we're still all involved in this part. Now what I'd like is so pair yourself with someone. So raise your hand if you're presenting, and we're gonna have everyone just rearrange a little bit. Raise it high so people can see. Okay, so Diana, why don't you 2 partner? And then Nora, you're presenting, right? So do you want to partner with Emily? And then Karen and the 2 of you partner. And then I just need a couple people from this side to move over to the people raising their hands over here. You can put your hand down because Diana's going to be. Okay, since there's only 6 people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 people presenting, can you just call out, I want to present slides 1 through 3, 4 through 6, 7 through 10, like that? Just count them. Slide one is the PVUSD draft sustainable budget. That is actually slide 1. Yeah. So
I'm willing to do 1 through 6, but I'm flexible. I'm willing to do 1 through 6, but I'm also willing to accommodate other folks, so.
Okay, Katie has 1 through 6. Thank you, Katie, for jumping to that. Yeah.
I think Nora just called us.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so Nora, you're doing what? 1 through 3? 1 through 6?
1 through 6.
Okay, Nora, 1 through 6. Do I have a 7 through? I think that's too many then, because it's 6.
I can do 7 through 12.
Okay, Katie has 7 through 12. Nora 1 through 6. Katie 7 through 12. Okay, Mike has 13 through 18. Okay, 18. How about you do 18 through 22? Because I think it's going to get close after that. You are the big guns. We just have 23 and 24. But we think we're going to add a couple more slides. Okay, and we know where to find you to help with that. So Richard, I think that means, did you already call a number?
No,
Are you 23?
I figured that the more
Yeah,
we don't
right,
have to-
that's good.
The more
Yeah.
presenters you have, the less of a flow it's going to have.
That's true.
I appreciate that everybody should be there, but I think limit the numbers presenting because there's nothing worse than having to watch the people. Yeah, but this one has an accent.
Okay, Karen, you and Richard, why don't you guys decide what you want to do there? You basically are going to be responsible for slides 23 and 24 and any additional, which Karen, I almost want to say we're just going to give you the additional because we know where to find you easily.
Yeah.
I think we present them as options that we looked at.
Okay, just for clarification, because this is my understanding, I want to make sure we're right. The question is, are we presenting A, B, C, and D, and E? And me and Jenny's understanding was that we were just presenting the revised, that we're going to say, here's what we looked at, and then here was the recommendation, and it's the revisions.
So we have the original consensus list, we have, the revisions from group
Here.
2, and then the revisions from group 3, so we'll present the 3 recommendations.
So I think we do it like maybe so here was the plans that we looked at. Here was a revision that was discussed. And then, yes, after some feedback from constituents, that there was an additional recommendation, discussion, and then a different recommendation going forward. Okay? Okay, so we'll be adding 2 more slides. So there will be final revised option B and D. So everything here exists and will stay in the presentation, but there will be a slide after final revised options B and D. And I think what we'll say is, this is the final after the group heard from constituents, and this is the next piece. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Okay, so we will add that in. Okay, we're gonna work on adding that in right now to the actual slide deck. However you feel comfortable presenting. I think what we want to do is give the board a real walkthrough of the discussions that we had and the way our committee came together, the way our team came to our different conclusions and the considerations along the way.
So will this, once we've finished or you finish the slide deck, is it possible to get access to it electronically between now and January so we can make notes and decide how we want to approach this?
Okay. As we are organizing ourselves over here, what Jenny and I determined we'll do is we're going to rework the slides to reflect the new recommendations. We will send the slide deck to all of you, everybody, tomorrow. We'll note in the body of the email who is doing what slides, and then we'll ask that you send your talking points or any notes or script that you want to us, and we will have that prepared for you. And what we'll do is we'll put it in like a sheet protector and have it ready for that night so that you can just have it at the podium, and then your script will be prepared for you, okay? So that's what we'll do tomorrow once we kind of rework this. Just to make sure we have the right people for the slides, Jenny, can you call out what our notes are so that we don't have any confusion? And if there's any mistakes, you can correct us now.
Yes, so we have Nora slides 1 through 6. Katie slides 7 through 12. Mike slides 13 through 17. Ashley slides 18 through 23. And then it looks like Karen and Richard slides 24 through, and then the additional slides. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So we'll ask that your script, like what you want to say and how you want to say it, how you want to write it out, basically the notes to yourself or even what you read out, be sent to us by this Friday. So we'll send you the PowerPoint tomorrow. We'll have all the revisions. We'll note what slides you're responsible for. And by this Friday, we'd like you to have your speaking notes. When you send them, put slide 6, I say this. Slide 7, I say that. Slide 8, I say this. That way we can format it nicely for you so that the day of, it's all just right there and you could read from it if you want, or you could use it to just help prompt you. Okay? Does that sound good?
To clarify, the additional slides, will we have a version that doesn't include an increased reduction from PVPSA and one that does include increased reduction of PVPSA? Or will both options have?
So we'll include pretty much the final 3
Okay.
revised options. So we'll have the original option that we came to consensus on, that totaled the 5.6, and then the 2 revised from today.
Okay.
Okay. So with that, it is 8:05 and 2 seconds. I think that concludes our sustainable budget team. What I do want to say is I greatly, greatly appreciate this team. When we knew that we needed to have a fiscally solvent budget and that it would require a very thoughtful process, as well as input from the community, we devised this plan to help get all voices. And if you hadn't agreed to be here, hadn't applied to be a part of the process, and then faithfully come every Wednesday that we had meetings, this process wouldn't have been representative of our community at large. And so I can't thank all of you enough. This takes courage and bravery. These are not easy decisions. I want to remind you all that this is a recommendation to the board. Ultimately, it's the board's decision. But this does help because it does represent, as Karen said earlier, the constituents you represented through this process. So I want to thank everyone for their time, their dedication. We had almost full participation every single meeting. And then for your commitment to being there on January 15th for the presentation. I know I thank you, and I know that I've heard many, many, many comments from our community with gratitude that you're representing interests. So thank you all, and I'll probably see you all before January 15th, but if not, I hope everyone has a very happy holiday season.